October 12, 1968. Cash was arrested at a police office in a Tennessee small town.
He was by himself, tired, and could lose his job because of the charges against him. The station's phone then rang.
There was Elvis on the line.
He didn't just get Johnny out of jail with what he said next, it changed both of their lives forever. Both men went through big changes in 1968. The world would see Elvis's comeback special in December, in which he would show why he was king. But the years between his time in the war and his comeback were hard.
He watched forgettable movies and felt like he'd lost his way. Things were even worse for Johnny Cash. Things were going badly in his marriage.
He was having trouble with the prescription drugs he had been taking to keep up with his crazy traveling schedule. He was at a turning point in his career. He kept touring and making songs, but the stress was too much for him to handle. The two men had known each other since the beginning, when they were both young artists making records at Memphis's Sun Records. They had been through the same hard times and stages together. It was hard for them to be young guys who were famous before they knew what it would cost them. Johnny was on his way home from a recording session in Nashville that October evening when he drove through a small Tennessee town.
He was worn out from being on the road for weeks.
He had not slept well in days. The medicine he was supposed to be taking to keep going was making him lose focus and feel disconnected. When the cops pulled him over for driving too fast, they saw pills on him. Not illegal drugs, but prescription drugs that he couldn't quickly show were legally given to him. The young and eager police officers thought that catching Johnny Cash would be a great way to get attention.
Johnny was being held at the police station in a small town.
He had his head in his hands. Even though he had been arrested before, this time felt different and heavy. It was like he was at a fork in the road where one wrong turn could cost him everything. As of that Saturday night, there were only a few officers at the station, and the desk sergeant was busy with papers. Johnny was only given one phone call, which he used to call his manager.
However, the manager was hours away and couldn't help right away.
Then, not long after Johnny was arrested, something strange happened.
The front desk phone went off.
When asked, the desk sergeant replied with his normal stern greeting, but his face quickly changed. His tone of voice changed as he stood up straight in his chair.
"Yes, sir," he replied. "He is here, yes." "Who is calling?"
The sergeant's eyes got really big when he heard the answer. Afterward, he turned his attention back to the phone and then to the area where Johnny was sitting. "It was true, Mr. Presley," the sergeant said. "I'll let him know you're coming." Johnny heard the name through the fog of being tired and sad.
Elvis was on his way. But why? How did he know?
Before that day, Johnny didn't know that Elvis had been at the same recording session in Nashville, but they hadn't run into each other. Elvis got in his car right away and started driving when he heard through the music business that Johnny had been arrested. He called ahead to let them know he was coming and to find out what Johnny was being charged with. It felt like forever to wait. Johnny sat in his cell and tried to figure out what was going on. He felt bad that Elvis would see him this way. In a different part of me, I desperately hoped that this could all be fixed. About 45 minutes later, when Elvis walked into the police station, the mood changed right away. His clothes were simple, just pants and a jacket, but it was clear who he was. The police officers stood up straight because they suddenly knew they were with someone important. But Elvis wasn't there to meet fans or sign pictures. Only one thing brought him there: to free Johnny Cash. At first, the desk sergeant seemed a little proud of having arrested a popular musician, but now he looked unsure. Elvis walked right up to him, composed and alert.
"I'm here for Johnny Cash," Elvis said. Even though his speech was quiet, it was strong. "How much does it cost?"
The sergeant explained: possession of prescription medication without proper documentation, erratic driving, potentially being under the influence while operating a vehicle.
"Has he been given the opportunity to prove the medication was legally prescribed?" Elvis asked. "Not yet, but I think that's where we should start." Johnny has been on tour nonstop for months. He's worn out.
A doctor told him to take those pills to help him keep track of his plan. You can be sure of that if you talk to his doctor. The sergeant looked at the younger cop who had put the person in jail. The officer, who had been so sure of himself before, now seemed less sure of himself. Still, the policeman said, there's the matter of the crazy driving. He could have hurt someone, but he didn't in that case. He wasn't mean to anyone. He didn't make an accident happen. He was stopped before something bad could happen. I think this man needs help, not punishment. This man has reached his limits because of a business that expects too much from its workers and doesn't care what it costs them. Elvis took a break. When he spoke again, it was softer but stronger. That's how I feel. I've been where Johnny is. I know what it's like to be so tired and want to keep going even though your body is telling you to stop. I've done bad things when I've tried to do what everyone else wants me to do. Johnny being in that cell and me being here talking to you are only different by luck and time. The sergeant was following along now. Really hearing. Elvis went on, so, here's what I'm suggesting. I'm going to be Johnny's parent. I'll personally make sure he gets home tonight without getting hurt. Whatever he's having trouble with, I'll make sure he gets the help he needs. I promise that he will show up to any court dates or take care of any other legal duties that come up because of this. I promise. Your word, the sergeant said, not in a rude way but because he was really trying to understand what Elvis was saying. My word, Elvis said again. Johnny Cash is a good person who was having a rough time, but this doesn't make him who he is. These charges and events don't fit with who he is. And if I can help it, I won't let this hurt him. Something about the way Elvis spoke, something real and intense, seemed to change the mood in the room. The police officers looked at each other, not sure what to do but clearly touched by what they had heard. A deal was reached after a lot of talking and calling, including one to a judge who had to be woken up but knew who Elvis Presley was, and there was a good chance that the charges would be dropped or lowered if there was proper proof of Johnny's prescription and Elvis's promise that Johnny would show up to any future meetings. Johnny didn't say anything at first when he saw Elvis standing there after being let out of jail. That man had driven a long way, walked into a police station, and put his own name on the line. He just stood there and looked at the man. Everything for him. Come on, Elvis said in a soft voice. Let's go. They left the police station together. More time would come to get Johnny's car. For now, Elvis took him to his own car and opened the door for the passenger. Johnny came in, but he was still quiet because he was still thinking about what had happened. They didn't say a word for about 20 minutes. It was a clear night, and you could see the stars over the highway. Elvis finally stopped at a small rest stop by the side of the road. Elvis said, "Let's talk." Johnny agreed, but he still didn't trust his voice. "Johnny, I meant what I wrote. This moment doesn't make you who you are. You're having a hard time right now. That makes sense. However, you're stronger than this. You're stronger than the demons you're facing." Johnny said in a low voice, "I don't know if that's still true." He hadn't said anything since leaving the station. The king said, "It's true. I know it's true because I've seen you. I've seen your skill, your heart, and how people react to your songs. You have something real, but you can't get to it when you're medicating yourself to keep going or working too hard." Johnny said, "I don't know how to stop. The traveling, the expectations, and the stress of having to keep making music. I'm scared I'll lose everything if I stop." Elvis said, "You'll lose yourself if you don't stop. That's even worse than losing everything else." He turned around and looked right at Johnny. "I went through the same thing. It was different situations, but I still felt stuck and like I didn't know how to get off the run. What I learned is that you have to choose between your life and your job. In the end, you won't have either if you lose your life to your job." No noise from Johnny. Taking this in. "What changed for you?" he finally asked. "I remembered why I started making music in the first place," Elvis said. "Not for the money, fame, or movies, music was important to me. Due to the fact that it linked me to a real thing. I understood that if I couldn't get back to that, if I couldn't figure out why it was important, then everything else was just noise.
Johnny asked, "Is that what the comeback special is about?" "Yes, it's about knowing who I am beneath everything else.
Being real again is important, even if it means being open.
Even if it means I had to say I got lost for a while."
They talked about music, stress, and the price of fame for another hour in the parking lot of that rest stop. These were two men who worked together at Sun Records and had more success than they ever thought possible. However, they both paid costs they hadn't planned for.
Before Elvis dropped Johnny off at his house, they finally got back on the road. Elvis said one more thing. He said it again, "This doesn't define you. But what you do next will. You can decide what kind of person you are and how you want to live. I'm here no matter what you decide. Please feel free to call me whenever you need help, someone to talk to, or someone who gets it."
John finally spoke, and his voice was rough from feeling.
"Thank you for everything tonight." Elvis said, "That's what friends do."
In the end, the charges from that night were dropped. With Johnny's medication and character references set up with Elvis's help, the prosecutor decided it wasn't worth going after. But that night's real effects had nothing to do with how the case turned out in court. Johnny Cash's life changed after that night in the police station and the talk he had with Elvis afterward. The change didn't happen right away, but it was the start of one. Johnny started the hard work of getting his life back on track over the next few months and years. He faced the problems he had been putting off and found his way back to what was important. When Johnny Cash was asked about his problems and how he got better years later, he would sometimes talk about that night, but he never went into specifics. He would say, "A friend helped me when I needed it the most.
Reminded me that one bad event doesn't have to make a life less interesting. You want that kind of friend, but you don't always find them."
Like always, Elvis never talked about it in public. When people asked him about his friendship with Johnny Cash, he would talk about their Sun Records days and how much he respected Johnny's music. But he never talked about the time he drove to a small-town police station to help a friend, even though it could have hurt his image. But people who knew both men and saw the bond between them knew what had happened. They also knew that Elvis did more that night than just pay bail or make phone calls. He told Johnny Cash that he was valuable, that his problems did not make him less important, and that he had people who would be there for him when things got tough.